once you start dealing with the root causes, you find it's a very, very tangled web of interlocking conflicts and ideas which are repeating. One way in which to one way in which we can break this endless cycle, and as you say, the cycle isn't just this last 10 years, it's even the last 30 odd years since the end of the Cold War, or even that cycle since 1945, and it goes way back into the 19th century, the Crimean War, and so much more. But I'm arguing that, well, as you say, we maybe don't know how to get there, but usually after a war, if you're going to have some sort of enduring peace, you do need to have some new ideas on the table. Now, what we haven't even got to the first stage yet, that's why I say we're only at the end of the beginning, is that where are these new ideas? Instead of new ideas, we have a European Union and most of the European powers doubling down on war fever, if you like, this virulent Russophobia, cancellation of Russia, which even the United States is finding excessive. J.D. Vance, Hegseth, and others, not because they love Russia, but because they'd like to focus on China, which is perhaps the only new element in all of this. In other words, they perpetuate a vision of international politics, which has to be conflictual spheres of influence, as you suggest, that either if Ukraine isn't a bridge, then it becomes a barrier, and so on. Luther would need to, as it were, a classic negotiating technique is that you escalate up, if you like, and try to look at the picture more widely, more broadly, which is what I think we have to do. So the first element of that is to generate a new debate about, you talked about a pan-European security system, yes, but that will only be a reflection, perhaps, of some larger pan-European community, political community. Now, it seems absurd to be even thinking about it at this moment, but it's precisely in the darkest days of a war that we do need to start thinking the unthinkable. How do we get there? I don't know. But that's where the second leg comes in, because the danger in all of this at the moment is that this war, it's a European civil war. And of course, this is what the Trumpists see it as, by the way, more and more, is that this endemic European civil war, and indeed in much of the global south, it is seen as yet again another war of the global north. And that's why so many countries in the global south want nothing to do with it. And they haven't joined the sanctions. And they just say, look, these ridiculous Europeans, they had one world war. Wasn't that enough for them? So they had to have a second. And now they want a third. Well, guys, we don't want anything to do with it. But that then takes us to the other huge danger today, and that is to the United Nations-based Charter International System. Already we see Ukrainians trying to effectively to exploit it as far as they can, but ultimately to denigrate it, to smash it, to destroy it. And of course, the Israelis do as well. They have nothing but contempt. We've seen that Trump just in the early days of 2026 pulled the United States out of, 56 international organizations. So the United States is defecting not just from the political West, its Atlantic alliance system, which many people would welcome to say it's time to put NATO to bed. It's served its rather destructive functions very well since 1989. But what we now need to do is they're also he's defecting also from the Charter International System, which the United States did so much to establish in 1945. That is catastrophic in my view. We have many Russian commentators arguing that it's time to build parallel institutions, maybe the BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, alternative financial institutions to the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, IMF. Well, that's perhaps one way in which you could try to break out from this very vicious circle in which we just, for 4 years of war, we've just been repeating the same thing over and over and over again. Since 2014, repeating the same issues over and over again. Since 1989, who was for NATO enlargement? Who's against it? Oh, the Eastern Europeans wanted to join NATO. How could we stop them? This is such banal bankrupt sort of thinking. We need to think about international politics in a new way. And this is where peace movements, where peace thinking is so important. This old classic American style international relations, which is all about power politics and so on. Well, so many would say humanity is facing so many challenges. And I would stress not just challenges, environmental and others, but also opportunities. The technological achievements in recent years are, fantastic. The fact that we can sit here and talk on this machine is just unbelievable. It's science fiction. And yet, what do we do constantly? We squander the opportunity. And now the Europeans want to spend the next decades rearming. Our magnificent foreign minister, Yvette Cooper, was in your country in northern Norway yesterday, calling for massive new defences up in, Kirkenes, as we would say in English. She was up there the other day, and of course we've just sent a huge military force to Greenland, all of one soldier to defend it against our ally. But this is just so, we're getting to the level of farcical politics.
Yeah, the Norwegians, we sent twice as many soldiers to Greenland as England, so we sent 2.
Okay, well done, imagine.
It's no, it's not very impressive at all. But I'm wondering if you're a bit hopeful about the new international distribution of power, though, because now that well, in the past, at least from a perspective of political realism, when the power is concentrated in Europe, you assume that the competition between the European powers would result in them more or less, dividing the world among each other. So it kind of then makes sense. You can have this, fragmented Europe, but still being the center of the world. But now that the distribution of power has shifted dramatically away from Europe, and is quite evident also, all reflected in the national security strategy of the US, that is how little regard it has for Europe, how the relevance of it. But in such a Europe, we can't really have afforded these dividing lines. We're not the center of the world anymore. So if we have a divided Europe today, it's not even after World War II, where the US will essentially try to build up the frontline states, and it will be, it can be in a good position. Instead, the divided Europe is one where the Western Europeans become too dependent on the US, Russia becomes too dependent perhaps on China, and this allows the US to begin to, I guess, convert all of this dependence, be it economic or security dependence, into massive loyalty. So the Europeans have to do everything they're told. I mean, and only becoming weaker and less relevant. So you would think that if there was ever a time for Europe to try to, do as the Charter of Paris for New Europe in 1990 stipulated, that is to have a Europe without dividing lines. You see now that at least the distribution of power favors it, because after the Cold War, I can see why we went for the hegemon. That is, the Europeans team up with the US, and we can have collective hegemony. If the Russians would have joined a common Europe, then it wouldn't have brought America in the same way. So it wouldn't have been a system for collective hegemony. So there was a strong incentive there. But today, the unipolar order is gone. I just don't see the same, well, from a structural perspective, I don't see the same incentives anymore to keep Europe divided as it was in the past. I mean, from my perspective, the redividing Europe was a price we paid to keep the Americans, present and focusing on Europe. But if the Americans are deprioritizing it anyways, why are we making an enemy out of Russia? It doesn't really make any sense.
Indeed. And worse than that, we bandwagoned and spoiled relations with China to some degree. They're now trying to mend their fences. But because the United States in 2018 started the tariff war, Europe then paused the investment treaty, which it had been working on for years, and so on. Indeed, it doesn't make sense. What we do see now, clearly, is a decoupling of the Atlantic power system. But as you know, European strategy is to see this out, to try to, as it were, placate the demonic energy of Donald J. Trump, and hope that in 2028 some new leader is elected and normality is restored. So I don't see that there's any much strategic thinking much beyond that, except in one rather deleterious respect, and that is to build up a European army. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, is now arguing that Europe needs to build up itself as a military power, which of course it's, I mean, it may be, it's sensible in all sorts of ways if it was done in a positive sense, to say that Europe needs to stand on its own feet and to become an independent agent. But what is Europe? United Kingdom has left, Norway's not in, but of course it's very close to Europe. But it's not this European Union that I think is one of the lessons of this war, that on a functionalist level, some of those elements of the European Union will be reproduced in a new format. But this European Union is quite clearly going to, we don't know how this war is going to end, but I think it's going to end badly. It's already ending badly for NATO. It's been discredited and such like. And I think also for the European Union. That's why I think that we need to start thinking, what sort of Europe do we want after this war? And the one that we want is the one that was on the agenda in 1945 and the one that was on the agenda in 1989-91. And that is, as you imply, a pan-continental vision. And of course, it would be a post-American Europe, but not an anti-American one. We'll work with the United States, who wants to be in conflict. Again, it will be maybe genuinely going back to that normative foundations of the European Union, which is as a peace project. But at the moment, Europe is reconstituting itself, this post-American Europe, as a war project, a long war, as they say, as Mark Rutte and others have been warning, against Russia for the next, a generational war. And indeed, they say in Britain, a war, a whole society war, which means, of course, what they mean by that, you need to have internal repression. Some of us have really felt the harsh blows from that respect, the censorship and so on. This is a catastrophic way. So this is why I think it's so important to outline an alternative, and that is a genuine, progressive, pan-continental vision. It'll be hard. And within that, a rump NATO, a rump reconstituted European Union will play a part, but we need to have something, a North Eurasian Confederation would be my way of arguing this one.